Exactly.
Hey, all right. Thanks for the tips, I always appreciate that.
Doing well, would you mind leading us to the flag?
No, no. Ready, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could we get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'd like a motion to approve action item discussion, approval of resolution 2019-20-9, ordering an election to authorize the issuance of general obligation bonds, establishing specification of the election order, and requesting consolidation with other elections occurring on March 3rd, 2020. Have a motion.
I'll move to approve resolution as read.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And the floor is open for discussion.
A couple things about discussion. I want to remind everybody, Adam Bauer is here, and I'd like to make sure he participates in the discussion. He's the guy who we've been working with from the get-go about financial issues and how we put out a bond, and I wanted to make sure we had our resident expert available.
Great. I have a couple of questions for Adam when we get there.
And I like the fact that I told you, my role as a superintendent is to try and give the board the best advice I can. And in regards to facilities, I don't think it's a surprise that 10 years ago we didn't get done what we needed to get done. We're 10 years later, and the only way to fix them is to have the funds to fix them. And so, as a board, I just ask you to realize that you represent the community. There's nothing more democratic in America than letting everybody vote to decide if they want to fix their own facilities or not. These aren't ours. They're not the schools. They're the communities. And I think it's important for us to say we made the attempt regardless of the outcome. I think the outcome will be positive. But even if it isn't, we're doing the right thing. It's the community's facilities, and let them decide.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
In general?
Comments with respect to the bond issue that we're looking at, this topic?
Yeah, as far as how much it costs and where it's going and things like that?
Certainly.
Oh, okay, yeah, I have a group of questions, the list of questions, so, I don't need to be first.
You're welcome to go first, Paul.
Well, I have some, okay. So I'm interested in what is the considered percentage of growth for the population to make this stay balanced?
Would you mind just taking the podium, please?
Or you can have that chair, if you're going to sit here.
And good evening. Once again, my name is Adam Bauer, and I serve as the district's municipal advisor. And what we've used as a projection for assessed value growth, which I think is what you're getting at, is 3%. But what's important to also note is as in the description that the superintendent has provided, the proposal here is that the district does not issue all the bonds at once. It issues them every 2 or 3 years. And what that does is if the assessed value does not grow by 3%, that next bond issuance, we're able to recalibrate, issue less money, and make sure that we're able to honor the tax rate that we're providing, that we've told the taxpayers we'd honor. So that's a little different than what the district has done in the past. We issue a lot up front with a higher assessed value growth assumption, hope that happens. Here it's dialed back quite a bit. Every 2 to 3 years we issue an additional series, and so we issue that 17 million. We expect it's going to take you 9 years to issue that full 17 million. So to be very to the point, 3% assessed value growth, but we have an ability to recalibrate every 2 or 3 years. If we do not achieve that 3%, those future bond sales would be less. If we do achieve that 3%, we'll have something higher than that. we might be able to issue even more than what we originally projected, or issue a little bit sooner, I should say.
Okay, so what I'm concerned with is, because the 3% has to do with the population growth as well.
It has nothing to do with population growth, other than population growth may impact assessed value.
Oh, okay, so that's how those two are connected. Like if our assessed value does not go up, it's probably because our population is not
Yeah,
doing anything.
so if you have a lot of people leave, a lot of homes drop in value, they couldn't sell, then that would hurt the assessed value. And that's why I think it's so important to issue these bonds in phases, and not try to get all the money up front.
Okay, and so then that kind of, I appreciate that you speak in percentages and huge numbers like that. If you could, however, just because it's easier for me to understand, if you could just sort of stick with, if I have a $300,000 house, then theoretically it's going to cost me $120 a year extra, right? Isn't that kind of the plan, or is $40 not the
So 40 is the number that we've looked at
per
here.
100,000 more or less?
Yeah, and your typical homeowner in this community has a home or of assessed value of 175,000. And that's what we looked at in the survey. We bought that data from CalMuni. But yeah, so the district as a whole has an assessed value of 1.3 billion. And that's what we look at as a whole. And then when I talked about the percentages though, we use 3%. Your 5-year average is 3.59. 10-year average is 1.27. That's why it's so important to do these in phases. But then we look at the 15-year average, 3.58, and 20-year average, 3.76. These numbers are a bit lower than the state averages. So your assessed value is not what statewide the districts have. So that's why I think 3% and in phases is so important.
Okay, and so let's just say that after 3 years, you find that there has been no change. And people are paying, let's just say, $80 a year then, which is kind of your implication, right?
Yeah, so I've taken a presentation that I provided in August. And if I can try to show you something.
Yeah.
So each colored bar represents a different series of bonds. And this red line represents that $40 tax rate. In 2000, here we assumed, we didn't know how positive those survey results were going to come in at. And so we assumed we'd go out in November of 2020. So the first series of bonds here is February 1 of 2021. We can move this forward now. This blue line, these blue lines represent the tax rate per 100,000. It's like a toothbrush. So we go all the way to tax rate, we put extra principal here, so we start paying it off at lower interest rates. And then in 2024, when we expect our next series of bonds, if the district were not to issue, so the board were not to take an action to issue an additional series of bonds, the tax rate would drop from 40 down to 10. And what we're doing there is leaving a lot of capacity so that we can adjust if the assessed value were to decline, not change, or even stay the same. What we're doing then, then the red bars get layered in 2024 in this scenario, but now it might be 2023. Then in 2027, the green bars get layered in. Finally, when we get to that last series of bonds, those purple bars, we've been able to monitor assessed value over a number of years, and then we issue that last series of bonds at that tax rate. But as laid out here, the district would have an ability to recalibrate if it does not achieve the 3% assessed value growth. And each time, we'd say, well, let's just say we got 2.5% instead of 3%, then I'm saying, I'm at a meeting like this, and I'm saying, I originally thought you'd be able to get 4.3 million on that next series, but now we're talking about 4.15. And here's why. I'll give you the arguments for it.
So can I just clarify then, so ultimately the goal with the way this is laid out is to control the impact to taxpayers and ensure that we never go over the $40.
That's correct.
That's not what happened with a scenario where everything's issued up front.
That's correct.
And the reason we're able to do that is because we're not building something new. We're fixing and repairing. And when you fix and repair, you prioritize your list. And you do what your funds allow you to do. And if you don't have enough funds, that's what comes in the next series. If you do have, you include it in the project. So if 4 years from now, we did a lesser rate because of how the economy or property values were, we would have less funds, but we would still keep in the process and continue to knock those lists down. But that's why you as a board control that. We're not subject to what's going to happen in the next 20 years of property values. We can control that without burdening the taxpayer.
Oh, I have more, but go ahead, we can take turns or something.
One of the questions that was recently asked of me was, why not a sales tax increase instead of a general obligation bond?
But I do not believe a school district could put a sales tax on the ballot. It need to be done through the city. And then from that point, you don't have usually typically as long of a period where you can levy, and you generally wouldn't generate as much in funds. But I'm working with Pasadena Unified, and what they had done was they worked with the city, and the city knew it would be very popular to have the school district as part of their sales tax measure, and so that district gets some money every year. It's not used for facilities like it is here, it's used for operation type activity. But that is that's uncommon. Out of all the districts we work with, I know of 2 that have done that.
Would that sales tax only, would that be restricted to what took place, was sales within the city limits?
Yes, and I believe it also requires a 2/3 vote, but I'm not sure of that. And it generally, you would not be able to sell bonds off that the same way you would off geo bonds. So your money would come in slowly. So you'd be able to get some money every year, but you wouldn't know exactly how much. And then you would, like I said, only be able to do some very small projects along the way, unless you had a very high sales tax.
And the economy is less stable than property.
Okay.
And so then, who all is going to pay for this tax should it pass? It will be business owners as well, or just property owners?
So if a business owner owns the building, then they're paying. So all commercial and residential property comprise the district's assessed value. So for example, this building is considered government property and would be exempt from the tax. But every residential and commercial property would be subject to the geo bond.
Within the district lines?
I'm
not
sorry, I
just
should
the
have
city.
said that. Yeah, within
Yeah.
the district boundaries, that's correct.
Oh, okay, and then it just would be added, assuming it passed, to the property tax or what, to the
Your county.
tax we're already paying from years back.
So what would typically happen is if this were to be on the ballot in March, they know because they submitted to register voters and help you do all that. But then I call them in around June and I say, hey, here's the tax rate that we promised voters and here's the bonds we expect to sell. We want it to be at this number. And some counties say, well, we have to build in this part of a reserve, or we do this, we do that. And then I work all those into numbers with them. And then by July, we have a number that we say to the district, here it is. And we help manage that to make sure it's on the tax rolls, which typically go out in about October. And as you know, paid in December and in April.
And one of the important things in our bond is we're not beholden to engineers, architects, DSA, all these crazy permitting things and tons of paperwork. We're fixing and repairing. There's a huge difference between replacing the roof and building a new structure. Building a new structure, 35% or more is probably going to go to soft cost. We don't have those issues. We're going to fix, the dollars we get are going to go into fixing and repairing the facility. That's an important thing about this bond issue is there's no big balloon payment sitting at the end like the other one had. There's no, here's $40 million, now you got to go spend it. This can be controlled by us. The board's going to approve contracts for what I'm hoping are a lot of local vendors. We don't need to go to San Francisco to get a roofer. We don't need to go somewhere to get the parking lot paved. We have people who do asphalt right around our county. And so there's a huge difference between this and the last bond. This is meant to fix and repair, not build new.
So I want to get really clear on, we initially go out for the bond. The initial tax rate was rated at $40. 2-3 years down the road, for whatever reason, we decide not to issue more bonds. The tax rate drops to around $10.
That's right.
And assuming we issue no more new bonds at all, it stays at $10 until it's paid off.
With these assumptions, yes.
With those assumptions, okay. So one of the things I want to point out is that legislatively at the state level, Newsom has put on a bill that theoretically will bring in around $15 billion for K through community college infrastructure repair and so forth. Obviously, if that passes, then theoretically, school districts like our own might have an opportunity to pick up some of those funds. Those are likely to be a split payment kind of a thing where the state pays 40%, 60%, we pay the difference. Those are opportunities for us hopefully to lessen the impact of the bonds going in the future. So as an example, if we were able to pick up $1 million from the state in 2-3 years, we wouldn't necessarily need to go out and sell bonds, assuming some of this stuff was working in our favor to that point. In addition to that, the CTA, I believe, is pushing to get signatures to put another bond measure on the ballot. Both of these bond measures, or both of these measures on the ballot, are aimed at being funded by business and the wealthy individuals in our state, not going after the middle class or the lower class. What are the chances of both of them passing? Well, let's just say I'm not particularly optimistic, but I'd be surprised if one of them didn't pass, and hopefully one or both of those will be valuable. Now, the one, of course, that the CTA is trying to put on is the one to force the state to pay, to raise everyone's budget to the national average of what's being paid for right now, and hopefully that passes. We'll see. Nevertheless, I think there are instruments being worked on at the state level that may lessen our necessity to sell more bonds in the future, and hopefully that's the case.
The other thing is that the state also has a program for modernization. Now, there's a lot of problems with it. They're years behind in doing what they're supposed to do. And our issue was that when the last bond was done, they took all those modernization tags and used them. But the high school cafeteria, the high school auditorium, both are places that need some work, as well as Blosser, because Blosser's now 30 years old. It qualifies. We have all our paperwork in for the state to apply for that. So if this were successful in passing, I would use those state tags to try and help. And for example, at Blosser, the decision the board would need to make is, it's $400,000 approximately to put a shingled roof on. It's probably $600 some to put a metal roof on. Well, if the state is paying 60-40, our 40% might be better off to go to a metal roof. But we'd have to have that state money. The state money's fine, but you have to have the 40% match to do that. So just the $400,000 roof, we don't have $140,000 to throw at Blosser's roof. But if we pass this bond, we will have the 140 that we could match that money with. That's the beauty of what you're proposing to do. You control what you do. You get a 3-year window, basically, of here's our funds, let's get these projects done. Oh, the state's going to help us at Blosser. Great. Now let's decide, do we want to do metal or shingle?
But you're right, currently we don't have,
They're irrelevant.
our budget constraints are such that even if they offered us the money, we wouldn't be able to utilize it.
The state could offer us $25 million. If we still got to come up with 40%, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. The state is never going to pay for everything. Never going to happen.
So from your experience, what's the percentage of bonds that pass that are fix and repair?
Oh, that's a tough one. A lot, though. If I would have known in advance, I could have prepared for that question. But a lot are, because generally a community says new development should have to pay school fees, or they should pay their own way for new facilities. So in my experience, a good portion, and I'm guessing somewhere in the 65, 75 range, are basically for modernization type activities.
Okay. And do most of those pass then?
Yeah, so in statewide, you're, depending on the cycle, around 85% passage rate for GO1s. A few things I want to say about what your survey suggests about yours is your survey results have come in higher than many of the others that we're seeing this cycle. And that's one of the reasons why we're here talking about March, is how good the survey results came in at. So,
How much experience do you have with this incremental disbursement of funds or bond?
if a district hires me, I try to make them do that, and I keep at it until I can explain why it's so important to do that. Almost every one of our programs is done that way. I can think of one instance in 19 years that we did a bit differently.
And so have you ever had one of those districts that passed a bond? What was the district that had the greatest challenge, where something went south on them?
In this program,
In this type of incremental disbursement?
the challenge for this program, this type of program, is inflation. So the costs of projects go up over time. And a community might feel they're not getting their projects as quickly as they hoped. So you're all going to work very hard and explain the facilities that are needed out here, and your community has some expectations. And so if you say, okay, well, here's 4.3 million of those projects, and we'll see in 3 years for 4.3 million more, and then 6 years for 4.3 more, some communities feel that that's not quick enough, and there's pressure to do more sooner. And so there's a discipline that needs, if you want to follow this program, that needs to be adhered to be able to stick with what we've talked about. Not oftentimes, we have to have many meetings like this in the future to say, here's why it's so important to do this in phases. So I don't see a challenge in that something has gone wrong where a board says this bond didn't work for us. The challenge is having to hold off on some facilities.
Something I really appreciate, Mark has this database of all the buildings in the Willis Unified School District and what in each building needs to be fixed, and an estimate of how much to fix each item in each facility. It's not like it's going blind, you know, we really know, I mean, because of Mark's work and the maintenance crew and everybody who put into that database, we really know what needs to be fixed and have an idea of what it's going to cost.
So just so you know, we appreciate that too. When the survey results came in and we thought about moving for this meeting, we said, well, we need to develop a project list. And your superintendent says, I have one for you, and sent it over. And I've never within 10 minutes have gotten a project list. Yeah. And to have dollars assigned to it as well was a sigh of relief, because we knew we could put it together pretty quickly then.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, that project list has been hanging over our heads for a long time.
That's right.
It causes some of us to lose a fair amount of sleep, because some of those things on that list will have a seriously negative impact on our budget if they get pushed to the forefront.
Yeah. And our project list obviously grows as time goes.
Right.
But it was easy because we had a project list 10 years ago. And I know what didn't get done.
Many of those things are still on that same project list.
They're still on the list. And, you know, that's what Adam's talking about is very true, because I've been in a district where we had a phase-in bond. The phase that people hated was the infrastructure phase, because you don't see that. That's why I think it's really important. The sheet I handed you talks about, in phase one, what are the things that are the most important on our list. And that's what I kind of put together. Clearly, that's not in stone. We could come tomorrow and have the high school boiler in pieces, and it will change our priority. But knowing what we know today, this is the start of a priority list of what we need to get done. It addresses every building. It'll be clearly noticeable to everybody who looks at the facility what's getting done. Because we have obvious needs. And we've been taking care of our facilities. You know, I'm fairly proud of the fact that since I've been here, we've done a really good job of trying to get our facilities where they need to be. But you can only duct tape and wire so long. You gotta really have the funds. We can't fix a parking lot. We don't have a paving machine. You know, my guys can't spend the whole summer doing the roof at Blosser because nothing else will get done. So we're kind of in a critical phase, in my opinion, that we need to give the voters an opportunity to say yes or no. And if they said no, we know where we're at. If they say yes, hallelujah, let's start making this place a lot better.
And so you're not talking about union employees necessarily if you're thinking of only having locals do the work?
There are things that our people will do if I can buy the materials.
Our people meaning the maintenance crews
Maintenance
here?
people, oh yeah, they'll be
Oh,
doing
okay.
stuff too. But the difference is when we go in now to fix something, for example, the science wing.
Mhm.
When we go in to fix the science wing, we're using putty, re-nailing boards over the top. We're not buying new tabletops. Because that's really what we need to do. We need to take those slate tabletops that are 60 years old, we need to take them off. But those are $800 and $900 to replace. Well, we don't have $800, $900 to replace all those. But I could buy those tabletops if we had the funds, and our guys can easily do that. But when you're talking big projects, you have to decide the scope of the work. Is it gonna take away from all those other tickets we gotta punch? And do we have the equipment?
Additionally, all projects that we do are subject to state law regarding public works projects. So, I mean, there is very specific
Anything over
requirements.
$1,000.
We are subject to prevailing wage issues, we're subject to bid thresholds, when must we go out for certain types of bids. We're subject to limitations on, in-house labor force account work. So there's a lot that dictates which route you have to go depending on like what dollar amount you're dealing with for particular types of projects.
I'll give you a real concrete example. If we wanted to paint the entire facility here, the entire high school, that project would be enough of an expense that it's something that's really a bidding thing. Once we bid, now you're in a prevailing wage scenario. A professional painter gets paid more than our maintenance guys do. Now it's become a prevailing wage project. Well, our union contract doesn't let us pay our guys prevailing wage. So you have to make sure it's the dollar amount of the project, it's the scope of work. Can our guys do a lot of stuff? Yeah, and they will. They already have. They do every day. But we have to gauge that, and we have to do it in incremental things. That's what's important, is the incremental nature of it. Like, we may not be able to blow the whole science wing up in one summer, but we could go a room at a time. And you would start with the chemistry and physics room, because they're the most high priority science rooms, and fix those first. And we can do some of the work.
And so the idea of going with a bond instead of a parcel tax was a good idea because it would affect less, it would be less costly? Or what was the reason behind that?
So a parcel tax needs 2/3 voter approval, whereas a geo bond, property managed geo bond needs 55%. Parcel tax oftentimes start off with small numbers, and then as a community has them in place, they renew them and go for larger and larger numbers. Generally, wealthier districts have parcel taxes. They also don't have the same ability that it's not necessarily based on like a assessed value of a home. So one parcel that is 800 acres oftentimes would have the same parcel tax as one that was a quarter of an acre. Now there's some approaches that folks try to do a little bit differently than that, but oftentimes it's not as tailored towards that value of that property as a GO bond would be.
Well, and when we talked about this, one of the things, and I'll use Chris as an example, because he's got a beautiful ranch and lots of property. A parcel tax is exactly the same for him as it is somebody who has a 500 by 500 foot piece of property.
Well, not really, because the way the parcel tax works, I think
Oh.
I have 15 assessor parcel
Yes.
numbers.
Yeah,
And I'd have a parcel tax for each one of those assessor parcels.
sure.
And one of the things that happens when you go out for a parcel tax, there's a silent opposition out there. People who have, farmers and ranchers.
Right.
They usually don't make a lot of noise, but when they vote, they don't vote for it because a GO bond is much more likely to be accepted in the community than there's not going to be organized opposition to that concept, whereas there's going to be unorganized but prevailing opposition to a parcel tax.
And Chris is quite correct. As an example, the 40 acres that Becky and I have on the west side of town, there are 5 parcels and only 1 residence. So, as a result, we get 5 times for the parcel tax for the fire department, for example.
But the disproportionateness of that is the nicest house in town, if it's on a parcel, is going to pay what the least nicest house in town are going to pay exactly the same thing.
Right, and with a bond, that's going to happen so long as we call each place a residence or a business, correct?
With a bond, basically the factor that makes it all even is all property owners pay the same based on their assessed value. Now, obviously, if you bought your house recently and you paid 2018, 2019 prices, you're going to pay more than somebody who still has the same property that they had in 1970, because their assessed value is much lower back then.
And there is no new assessment coming out?
You're only when your property sells.
So
Your property gets reassessed
each year, incremental increase.
Yeah, there's a
But
tax increase.
it's like
every year.
1% or something like
Well, it's
that.
2 now.
So without a property, with Prop 13, without a property changing ownership or changing more than 500 square feet in square footage, the property will only go up by CPI or 2%.
That's the max.
That's right.
But that can happen every single year.
It does happen every year.
And my understanding, which could be incorrect, but it was after so many years, the assessors can come in and reevaluate.
Not true.
Only if the
That's
property
allowed.
changed ownership.
Okay, changed ownership, not necessarily was sold, but just titled over to someone else.
I
Maybe
don't know
that's where the
technicality. I think we've always referred to it as sold. I don't know if there's a
Oh.
technicality there.
Well, that
you
may
can
be
transfer.
where my confusion comes from, because that's my confusion. Okay, and then, excuse
I
me.
was just going to let Adam know. Chris is very knowledgeable. He's a former board president and a local attorney, and he deals with taxation, and he represents a lot of the county organizations.
Okay.
So that's why he's kind of my resident expert also.
Good.
And then to do it in March instead of November. My concern, I understand that if it was like a 2-to-1 or whatever, it was a 2/3 in favor, 1/3 opposed on your surveys, more or less, not exactly, but sort of. And that's good to do it in March instead of, in November, you're gonna get a lot more people voting.
No.
So
That's
that's,
a bigger election, at least it's always happened for the past around.
yeah, so that was true until 2018. And what we saw, so if we take a step back, President Trump was elected in November of 2016. And then since then, we've seen a lot more Democrats and Republicans show up in both cycles. What we saw in 2018 was the primary and the general election had a lot more Democrat turnout than they had in the past. But now you're also seeing a lot more Republican turnout as well. But we saw a lot of success March elections than we've seen in the past. What we're also seeing in March of 2020 is the primary has been moved up. And so a primary, when it's held in May or June, Californians weren't having a say in the presidential candidates because they were already selected at that point in time. And so I think there's two things going on here. One is Californians would like to have a greater say with the March cycle. The other thing is whether you like Donald Trump or not, you're coming out to vote. And you want, if you don't like him, you're coming out to vote for a Democrat. If you like him, you're coming out to vote for a Republican. And so that turnout, generally when school districts see more success when the turnout's high. And so that's what we saw in 18, and the survey consultant was recommending that that's what we'd see in 20 as well.
You know, what I think is going to happen is there's 12 or 13 people now on the Democratic ticket to be president. In California, which is a major Democratic state, you're going to have a ton of people coming to the primary to sort that out. There's a ton of things bringing people to the ballot in March. It's not just a primary. There's a lot of stuff on it. And so I think our turnout will be high, which Republican, Democrat, whatever, I'd like everybody in town who can vote to vote, regardless of how it turns out. I think that's important. And I think our turnout's going to be really high in March. Because in California, if you're a Republican and you're interested in the presidential election, your vote's going to be probably irrelevant in November.
So the second thing that our survey consultant was saying was, while 17 million is a huge amount to what we want to do, in the grand scheme of things in California, it's a smaller number. And so there's going to be so much activity going on in November that it would be hard to really get everyone to understand how important our 17 million is. Whereas in March, even though there's a lot on the ballot, it's not nearly as much. And so if you go back to 2018, I don't think you could watch a 30-minute show without seeing 10 political ads, right? We're definitely going to see it again in 2020. You'll see it in March too, just not the same degree that we're likely to see in the November cycle.
A reason not to have a TV.
That's for sure. It comes everywhere. When my son brings in the mail, he's like, "Hey, here you go, Dad." It's all these mailers about who to vote for, right? So it's hard to get away from it.
And they are doing bonds all over our county. Ukiah's doing one, Fort Bragg has one, Mendocino is either doing one or in the process of doing one. This isn't an uncommon thing. We are the only ones doing a staggered bond. They are all doing bonds that generate a boatload of funds up front to do things. But I just don't think that's a good idea in our case. Not just because of past history, but also from the standpoint of legitimately getting things done. We have a far more likelihood of having local participation if we have smaller amounts and projects we can handle. Instead of, if we had $17 million all at once, we'd have to hire a construction manager because there'd be 20 contractors all over the place. We don't need 20 contractors. We can manage our projects based on the list we have. We don't have to bring in management to do that. That's the downside of having a lot of money up front.
Any further?
No, those were my biggest concerns.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, Al.
Other
Thanks,
people?
Sam.
Anybody in the audience have some questions?
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions, I have some comments.
Please. Your 2 minutes starts now.
I'm a fast talker. The time that I was on the board, one of the painful realities was that we had unmet maintenance needs. I think we have a great maintenance department that's kept this place running with a really little amount of funds. And I'm glad to see that you're moving forward with this because when this first came up, about 2 years ago, I think, the one concern I had, I realized that there's a very great need. One concern I had was you can't predict the economy, and we're riding a pretty good wave right now. So this staggered approach, or phased approach, is precisely the answer to that problem, because it allows you to fall back, and if you're going to authorize some bond sales in, say, 2023 or 2024, there's be another meeting like this, and people from the community can come and say, you know, we don't think the economy can hold it right now, you know, don't move forward, and you can hear and make your evaluation at that time. What you can't do, these bond measures take a long lead time, so, you know, this phased approach is, I think, ingenious. And I checked Adam, he wasn't wearing white shoes like the last guys that came here.
I didn't tell you that.
So I think that some thought's gone into this. You know, the whole idea of not trying to build Taj Mahal new buildings that are going to be very expensive, and you know that 30-35% estimate is very real, and maybe even understated. I remember I was on the board in 1980, and it took us until about 1990 to get the funding from the state for Blosser Lane. And he keeps talking about Blosser Lane being 30 years old now. I think of a brand new building. But at one time they were building the truss in the cafeteria. They had it all put up, and then they found out at the state level that it hadn't been inspected on the day it was constructed, because the inspector had to go home early or something because he was ill. And we literally had to take the truss down and put up a new truss, even though there was no identified problem with the truss. That kind of state regulation is the kind of thing that you're completely avoiding with this project as it's structured. And I think it was clear to me that when Mark first brought this up, I mean, the first thing that caught my attention was that you have to at least ask the community. If you don't ask, you don't receive. And the community could say no. The community could say yes. I think the community will say yes, because I think this town has had going back 100 years, has had a tradition of trying to have the best facilities available for its students. You look at the auditorium that was built in 1930, and you look around at what the auditorium was like in Ukiah or Fort Bragg or Hopland or Anderson Valley at that time. We had the best facilities in the county, because this town supported facilities and it's a tradition in this town, and I think it's a tradition that underlies everything, it's just in our genes. And so I think that you're going to find some very strong support for this measure, and I like the way it's structured. I think you've got a good deal. Thank you. It's good seeing you all again.
Yeah.
I'm going to go home and eat dinner.
Thanks, Chris.
When I first was hired, Chris told me I couldn't use the B word.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the last set of bonds that were issued left a sour taste in all of our mouths, largely because of the company that got us into it and the way it was structured and the way it was administered. So hopefully the structure of this bond will eliminate the chances for many of those pitfalls.
Yeah, well,
Any further comments? Debate? Time to call for the vote. So a roll call vote, I believe.
And this is to ask for the bond to be on the ballot, right?
This is to
ask the community if they want to fix their stuff.
Yep. Right there. Ms. Nunez?
I'm still a no.
Jeannie?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Myself? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. Moving forward. Public comments for items not on the agenda. None? I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Is this also the time where we can have things put on the next agenda, right? That'll happen next Wednesday?
Yeah, if you want to just see me after the meeting?
Okay. Then I move that we adjourn.
Okay. Second? All in favor of adjourn?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting's adjourned.